Hi, I'm Don Stanek, and I'm your instructor for Certified Sales Interrogator. Up to this point, we've gotten 2 out of our 3 major components in place. The first one being the story categories, which are experience, urgency, ability, status, requirements, and motivation. Remember, we don't want to have an incomplete understanding of the person we're speaking with, so we have to make sure we have information in each of these categories. The next component that we focused on was what are the mechanical types of questions that we have available to us, and what do those questions look like in their categories. And so we talked about open-ended and closed-ended questions. We talked about light commands. We talked about conditional statements and also tie-downs. Now, the third component that we're introducing into this section is how do we take the mechanical questions and the concepts that we have to fill, how do we take those 2 things and create more easygoing dialogue so that our questions don't seem like an interrogation, so that our questions flow comfortably in normal conversation. We're going to take quite a bit of time in this chapter to dissect what does the sentence look like, what is the sentence structure, and most importantly, the third component, which are transition statements, preparatory statements, educational statements, and most importantly, follow-up questions. Preparatory statements have 2 big functions for us. Number 1, it creates an alert. Okay, I'm going to say something that's important and my customer needs to be aware. So I'm trying to captivate their attention. The other thing I'm doing with a preparatory statement is I'm adding context to a question that's going to follow. So an example would be, Jim, when it comes to mortgage, or Judy, when we're thinking about selling your home, right? So what I'm doing is, instead of just throwing a question on them cold, a who, what, where, when, why, how question, what I'm trying to do is trying to soften it up. Imagine you're like a pitcher in a baseball game and it's the wind up before the pitch. Why am I doing this? Because I'm trying to establish some comfort. I don't want it to feel rigid. I don't want it to feel hard. What I want to do is kind of take some sandpaper and soften the edges around my interrogation. Jim, so when we're thinking about mortgages, or when you're exploring mortgages, or as you have done some homework around mortgage, what is it that your concerns are? Or what are your biggest concerns? So as we take the preparatory statement and as we start crafting out some reasonable types of conversation around it, your questions and your interrogation are just going to go so much smoother. Preparatory statements can help you help your customer break down the barriers of sharing. And so one of the ways I do this is I want to help someone dream like without limits. And so when I'm talking to them about buying a home or selling a home, what I want them to do is I want them to step into the future, and I want them to see themselves in a place where they're happy, they're content, they've made a good decision, and they've moved past them. They've transitioned from the old property into the new property. I might use a preparatory statement like this. I might say something like, Judy, in a perfect world, if money were no object, if you had all the time and the money in the world, right? I might use these esoteric, dreamlike statements to get someone to a point where they can actually open up. In a perfect world, like if money were no object, what type of home would you want to live in? Like, let's not talk about the money. Like in a perfect world, tell me about the neighborhood that you want to live in. And this is when your prospect might actually start opening up. And they're like, well, look, I know money is an object, but I'd like to be closer to the beach. I'd like to be able to live in a high-rise building, and I want to be able to walk the streets, and I want to be able to get a fresh bread at the cafe and some cheese. And I'm like, well, you might want to move to Europe. But here's the thing. If I get someone to open up and start telling me these types of tales, I can find little tiny details in there that I'm going to use when I'm positioning around my presentation. If I understand that, okay, they want a walkable neighborhood, it doesn't necessarily, does it really have to be a high-rise? Does it have to be by the ocean? Does it have to even be urban? Could that be a place where there's just a nice walking path that brings you to mixed-use retail in a suburban environment? The answer is we don't know, and I wouldn't have gotten there had I not given this person permission to dream. These preparatory statements are an excellent way to help someone dream and to break the barrier of dreaming and so that they can start sharing. Remember, you're adding context, you're putting somebody on alert, and you're helping them dream. Preparatory statements are an excellent tool to get this done. So let's take a deeper exploration now into transitional statements. Transitional statements do three things for us. Number one, they help us advance the discussion. Sometimes we get stuck in an area and we have a hard time moving forward. Number two, it helps us find little bits of closure and little bits of agreement within our dialogue so that we can kind of put a bow on it and move on. And the third thing it does really effectively is it gives us an ability to probe it deeper with maybe some follow-up questions right behind. Closing on small agreements or being able to transition into that next topic is important in order to keep the conversation going. So I might say something like, so does this make sense so far? Or with everything we've covered, do you feel like you've got a good understanding so far? Or we've spent quite a bit of time talking about how we're going to market your property. Do you feel like you've got a good understanding of that? Or would you like to spend more time exploring that, right? So what am I doing? I'm trying to advance the discussion. I need to put a bow on it. So I'm kind of asking some tie-down type questions to see if I need to go deeper into this topic or if we've just kind of beaten this thing to death and I no longer have an interest in this prospect's understanding of what they may or may not understand, right? Do I have to go back and revisit this? And so this is the type of statement that I would use. With everything we've talked about so far with regard to marketing your property, are we tracking? Does this make sense, right? So that's kind of a tie down. And they'll say, yeah, I think I got it. Then I might say in the transition statement, do you feel like we need to spend more time in this, or do you feel like we could move on and talk about next steps? Talk about the next thing. Yeah, no, I think you can move on. Great. So we've taken this chunky kind of process and it's kind of mushy and we kind of structure it. I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to present a little bit of material and I'm going to ask some more questions and then I'm going to put a bow on it and I'm going to transition to the next topic. Why am I doing this? Because I have to cover experience, urgency, ability, status, requirements, and motivation. I don't have a complete story until I have a complete story, and I don't want to get stuck in one part of that area, that story where, gosh, I know everything there is to know about that one thing, but there's 4 or 5 other categories and topics I'm totally blinded on. It's important to keep this discussion moving forward because I might not just be dealing with one prospect at a time. What if I'm at a trade show? What if I'm in an open house environment where I've got multiple people coming up to me at the same time? I have to be able to get through my discussion quicker, and I need to be able to do this without just like disqualifying or putting somebody off. I can do this because I have transition statements that are in my head, and I know that I put a period at the end of the sentence, and now I've got a little bit of an agreement. Okay, boom. This person doesn't need to know anything more about this topic at this time, which means whoosh, I can move on to the next topic and start filling in my story points. The last type of statement we're going to talk about in this segment are educational statements. Educational statements are used to add context and also to probe a little bit deeper into our customer's experience on the topic. And we're doing it in kind of an assumptive way. So I might say something like, so Jim, when it comes to mortgage, it's kind of about down payment and income and credit. And so out of those 3 things, is there any one in particular that you'd have concern over? So what I did is I gave an educational statement about mortgage. There's 3 components to mortgage, right? Your down payment, your credit, and your source of funds. Now, my customer may or may not know that, but what I did is I just kind of informed them. I'm kind of educating them. These are the 3 areas. These are the 3 buckets that you want to focus on. I'm taking the conversation and I'm guiding it into one of these 3 buckets. Giving them education. I'm presenting a little vignette of mortgage understanding, a little vignette of information and with a statement. It only took me a couple of seconds. And so I might do this around a variety of topics. Maybe I'm sitting in a listing presentation and I say, Jonathan, as you well know, all sales is kind of about supply and demand and advertising definitely drives greater demand, right? Yeah, that makes sense. So with that on the table, when we talk about marketing your home, do you have any kind of specific questions around what we've talked about? Now, what did I do there? They may or may not understand supply and demand. They might not understand that advertising creates demand. But because I delivered an educational statement on the front of a question, I added context, I gave them some understanding, and then I was able to deliver the question. Now, I don't want to seem too arrogant when I deliver this educational statement. I'm assuming that they already know something that they may or may not know. But I want to do this in such a way that it's so gentle that they're gleaning information, they're gleaning greater understanding from what I'm offering, and it doesn't seem like it's presented in a direct or challenging way. Being able to use these types of educational statements throughout your entire presentation, throughout all of your story points, is an essential way to create communication, to be able to transmit additional information, and to promotion within the discussion. The last thing we're going to talk about in this segment is asking follow-up questions. It's an essential skill in order to help build additional and deepen rapport and to get clarity and to ensure that you're getting to all of the story points that you need. I use follow-up questions all day long. They're coming after I give a question or present some material. If I'm presenting some sort of information and I'm looking for a response, and I'm going to listen to that response and understand how it fits into my story point categories. And then, do I have a complete understanding, or am I just off base here? Do I need additional clarity? So if I'm showing properties to a prospect and I might say, we've seen 3 homes today, and it was property A, B, and C, and it seemed to me like you were most impressed with the second house. Can you tell me why, right? Can you tell me why you're most impressed with the second house? I'm asking for clarity. It's a question, right? So they'll say, well, the second house, it had the master bedroom that I liked. It had the kitchen that I really liked. And it seemed like it was not that far. It's a pretty easy commute to work. And it's in the school district that we're looking for. Oh my gosh, so you're telling me that it fits 4 of those categories. Is that what I hear you saying? Yes, that's what I hear you saying. So is there anything else about that second house that you also felt was favorable? Well, it did have a decent backyard, but it was like so-so. I'm like, okay. So the backyard was so-so, but it had these other favorable things. When you think about the first house or the third house, where do they rank? Where do they rank in terms of your true desirability? Now, they've kind of already answered this question for me, but what I'm trying to do is probe a little deeper. I want to galvanize their thinking using this follow-up question. And they'll answer this. They might say, I don't think I need to consider those other 2 homes at all. Boom. What have I done? Some follow-up questions. I've put some closure on this topic, and I've gotten a little bit more clarity that the home that I showed them fits 4 or maybe 5 out of the things that they were really concerned about in the earlier discovery process. Now, why is it so important that I get here? I have to get here because when we're looking at homes, we can always find another house, find another house, find another house. And a lot of times when you're showing property, you're going to find that you get into that cycle. If you don't start asking some closing questions and try to get this person narrowed down to a one of a kind, you might find yourself showing property to this person every weekend for the rest of your life. Now, this doesn't mean that they're non-committal. This just means that you're not helping them guide their path through to ownership. Now, the same thing happens when you're trying to do a listing presentation or selling a house. When it comes to selling your home, can you help me understand what are the main considerations around your time frame? Okay, maybe that's my initial question. And then the home seller says, well, we're pretty flexible. We want to make sure that we get our right price. We don't want to be inconvenienced. I really don't want a bunch of people walking through my house all the time. And I don't know. So what happens here? you got sprayed. So you ask a pretty legitimate question about time frame consideration, and you really didn't get an answer, right? So you could just let that go and hope that it resolves itself at some point in the future, but that's a huge mistake. You need to get that story point. What is the story potential in that question? Time frame is huge when it comes to selling your property. It's highly disruptive. If you're going to have to move out of your home and move into another home, it's not a casual discussion. So you're going to have to probe a little deeper. So you may say something like this. Well, no, I guess what I was really trying to understand is when it comes to your motivation on the calendar, do you need to move by the end of the year? Do you need to move by the end of September, which is the end of the school year? Do you need to move by the end of the tax year, which is April 15th? Can you help me understand a little bit in more detail about when it is you need to move, or what are the compelling reasons that are driving your time frame? So, man, oh man, I went in for a deep, deep cleaning on that question. I don't want you to seem like you're being pushy. I don't want you to seem like you're being aggressive. I kind of want you to feel like, I'm confused. As a salesperson, I'm confused. The customer has all the answers, but as a sales professional, you have to ask the right question to get the right answer in return, and you have to guide that person through. The follow-up question is absolutely essential for getting that type of clarity and to also move through all the haze of the discussion that you're having with a buyer or a seller or someone who's even mortgaging their home. If you don't ask good follow-up questions, then what happens is all of the detail that you're getting is kind of on the surface. We need to get down deep into understanding what is really driving this person's core motivation. Without follow-up questions and context around follow-up questions, it's just going to be really difficult for you to get to the real point and the real story. Now, asking these follow-up questions also gives you a lot of additional credibility, because if you aren't asking the question, it means you don't care. Asking the question isn't about challenging someone or challenging their integrity or giving a challenge to them personally. It's about, I'm a sales professional, and in order for me to help you and position you in the best possible way in the market to get success, I need to really understand what is making this situation tick. And until I get that real deep information, I just don't think I'm going to be able to provide a really great service. So you're positioning yourself as a student of the consumer. I need to understand better so I can better position you in the market and help you make a great execution plan based on what your needs and your wants in your time frame. Without follow-up questions, you're dead in the water. You're going to be too high in the surface, and you're not going to get to the deeper issues at play. Congratulations, you made it through this chapter. It's a big one. We talked about preparatory statements, we talked about educational statements, we talked about transitional statements, and we talked about follow-up questions. It's a beast, and I would encourage you to take as much time as you need to go through this video maybe a second or even a third time and take some really good notes. If you find yourself struggling at this point in the program, I would encourage you to get on my calendar. I'm very accessible, and you can send me an email or you can call my 800 number. I would love to talk to you. I'd love to help you get a better understanding of this chapter and make sure that you're prepared to go on to the next one.